There is another very important result in the basic theory of markets called the second welfare theorem that you need to know about because it's really related to the problem of redistribution. It's called the second welfare theorem, and it says the following. Let alpha be a Pareto optimal allocation, any Pareto optimal allocation in the model. Then there exists, or there is, a list of lump sum M good transfers with their sum t equals 0, such that alpha is a competitive market equilibrium given those taxes. Okay? So in other words, and this is very striking, you can make any Pareto optimal allocation the result of the market if the government, before it lets people trade, just implements a particularly chosen vector of lump sum transfers. Now, this result is very general, much more general certainly than our model, our quasi-linear model, but I want to explain it to you here using the quasi-linear model. So let me give you the intuition here. And the intuition has two parts. First is notice that in our model, the lump sum taxes transfers do not affect the Q good market. We have seen before that as you implement those transfers, the equilibrium level of Q produce and consume, and the equilibrium price is not affected. What is affected is the consumption of good M. And a way of thinking about what happens is the second part of the intuition is like this. Let's look at a case in which there are only two consumers. Okay? And I'm going to plot here the utility of the first person and here the utility of the second person. And suppose that we are first at a no trade allocation like this one. So this is the no trade allocation. Let's say in which person 1 gets a lot less welfare than person 2. Let's say this is the 45-degree line. Okay? Now what happens when people trade without taxes is that they're going to move, let's say, to an allocation like this, which is the competitive market equilibrium with no lump sum transfers. Okay? They're going to move to something like this that tends to make everybody better off. But still, because maybe where they started, one of the people is much better off. Now, by the way, in this graph, we can define, if we draw a 45 minus 45-degree line, this set is going to be the set of Pareto optimal allocations. Because if you think how this set is generated, is you take the optimal allocation generated by the trade, and then you can reach any one of this by implementing a tax that looks like this. Let's say in this particular case you tax individual 2, a lump sum tax, and then you give person 1 the opposite. They are up to 0 and they move to a point like this. You can implement another one like this. You can redistribute in the other place like this. So as you change the tax for person 2, positive or negative, and a continuous amount, you expand the entire frontier. The total utility in society has not changed. So total sum of the UIs is constant, but you're changing the distribution. So what this second welfare theorem is telling you is that all you have to do for implementing in our model any of these allocations that you may be interested in, let's say the full equality, let's say you're interested on that, is find the tax policy that gets you there, implement it, and then let them trade. And basically what they're going to do is, first, the tax policy is going to move them there, and then they're going to move to the frontier. It's very, very intuitive and very simple in our world. Now, it's very important that we think carefully about what are the implications of the second welfare theorem for the role of government policy in mitigating the inequalities that the market may generate. There is a naive interpretation or reading of the theorem that unfortunately is not completely uncommon, although it should be, that says that second welfare theorem implies no need for distortionary labor income taxes. All you have to do is use lump sum tax or transfer policy to redistribute, which implies no deadweight loss. In other words, I mean, if taken literally, it says, yes, this is fantastic. You want any Pareto optimal allocation within a particular kind of distribution, find it and just implement the associated vector of lump sum taxes and transfers, and it will get you there. The reason I call this a naive interpretation is that there is a problem here that has to do with the fact that the lump sum tax policy in the second welfare theorem has or involves unreasonable informational demands. Notice that in particular, the government needs to choose a specific tax transfer TI for all I. And to choose it, it needs to know the fundamental parameters of the individual. So for example, it knows who has high disutility of labor or low disutility of labor, so it can choose the tax appropriately. That is unrealistic. The reason in practice we have to use these policy instruments like labor income taxes is that we don't really know who has high disutility of labor or low disutility of labor. We only know what we observe in the market, and the policy has to operate with that low level of information. The labor income tax policy regime that we have studied, with all its imperfections, has realistic informational demands. This view of the second welfare theorem that says you can just solve the inequality problem by picking the lump sum tax policy is fine in theory, but it doesn't work in practice.